Billionaire CEO froze when little girls said, "We want to work for our mom. We want to work instead of our mom." That's what they said. Two 6-year-old girls in matching skirts and white headbands, standing in the doorway of a billionaire CEO's office with a folded blue piece of paper. They didn't cry, they didn't giggle. They just stood still, as if the whole world depended on what happened next. And what he did in that moment, what he saw behind their trembling hands, would break everything he thought he knew about success, love, and himself. Because they weren't looking for a job, they were trying to give their mother back the life she never asked to lose. It was early, the kind of quiet morning Manhattan rarely allows. Soft gray skies pressing against the skyline, the office lights just starting to flicker on. On the 27th floor of Harris & Co., the air smelled like espresso and ambition. Daniel Harris was already behind his desk. He always was. Billionaire, precision-driven, the kind of CEO who measured everything: quarterly projections, asset flow, how many seconds you wasted in an elevator. He liked control, he lived by spreadsheets, and he never, ever let emotion interfere with business. But that morning, emotion walked into his office in the form of two 6-year-old girls with blue eyes and paper resumes. "Are you lost?" his assistant had asked. "No," the smaller one replied. "We have a meeting." They didn't knock. They didn't hesitate. They just stepped into a glass office that had swallowed grown men whole and looked him right in the eye. They stood side by side, same white shirts tucked into denim skirts, backpacks too big for their shoulders, and paper shaking slightly in their hands. "We want to work instead of our mom." Daniel blinked. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. They weren't pretending, they weren't playing. They believed, with all the heartbreaking certainty of children, that this was how they could save her. He asked their mother's name. "Emma Gray," they said. He'd never heard it spoken aloud before, but he remembered it. Buried somewhere in a staff file, janitorial, night shift, 3 years, no complaints. She cried in the bathroom at night, the girls said. She thought they didn't know, but they did. He looked down at the paper one of them handed him. It was light blue, creased, smelled faintly like strawberry shampoo. At the top, 3 stick figures, a yellow sun and the words, "Mommy, me, and me too." Below that, in crooked block letters, "We can wipe tables really fast. We never forget to say please. We can make coffee, but we can't reach the top shelf yet." No business plan had ever hit him that hard. He stared at them. 2 tiny girls, trying to carry a weight that never should have been theirs. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Harris didn't know what to say. So he said this, "Where is your mom right now?" They didn't answer. They just looked up at him like someone who might open a door. And the question that hung in the air, like static before a storm, was this. What happens when a man who's spent his life building empires finally sees the one person who cleans them? Chapter 1. The Woman Behind the Gloves. The file said Emma Gray, but it didn't say anything about her hands. It didn't say how raw they'd become, skin thin from bleach, knuckles cracked open from cold tile floors. He didn't mention how they trembled, quietly, every time she unscrewed a mop handle at midnight in a building that smelled like expensive cologne and forgotten paper cups. Daniel Harris sat alone that afternoon in the HR records office, a plain brown folder in his hands, watching black and white footage of a woman he had passed 100 times and never once seen. She entered through the side door just before midnight, wore a gray hoodie, hair tied back, like she'd run out of reasons to care how she looked. She clocked in, picked up a cart of supplies, and began the ritual she repeated 5 nights a week, sweeping behind chairs, wiping marble that would shine again tomorrow for people who never learned her name. In one clip, she stretched her back slowly near the executive kitchen. The way her shoulders sank, not from weakness, but from quiet, sustained pain, hit Daniel harder than it should have. He realized then, he had built a world where someone like her could disappear in plain sight. And maybe that was his greatest failure. He flipped open her original application again. It had a line written in pen. Former law student, took extended leave due to family emergency. There was a note from her previous supervisor. Punctual, quiet, never misses a shift. He never missed a shift, not even once in 3 years. He leaned back in his chair, staring at her name, Emma Gray. He hadn't known it this morning. Now it was lodged in his chest like a splinter. He didn't call her right away. Not because he was unsure, but because he felt unworthy of the conversation. So he waited until his hands stopped shaking, then picked up the phone and said gently, "Miss Gray, this is Daniel Harris. I believe we need to speak about your daughters." When she arrived the next morning, Emma didn't walk. She folded herself into the room. Every step said, "I don't belong here." But every part of her face said, "I came anyway." She wore a navy sweater and jeans that had been washed so many times they'd gone soft at the seams. She had no makeup, no assistant, no confidence left to burn. But she came. She sat across from the man whose buildings she cleaned. And she apologized, not for herself, but for her daughter's audacity. Daniel didn't let her finish. "They're not in trouble," he said quietly. "In fact, I think they may have taught me more in 10 minutes than I've learned in 10 years. Emma blinked. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Like he meant them. Like he saw her. Then he did something no CEO had done in her presence before. He pushed a folder toward her. Not her termination, not an apology letter. Legal training packet. "There's a part-time legal assistant position open. It comes with mentorship and remote learning credits." She didn't reach for it. She didn't trust it. "You said once in your application that you were a law student," he added. "Maybe it's time you finished what you started." Emma swallowed, hard. "I haven't studied in years," she whispered. "I barely remember how." "You remember more than you think," he said. "And your daughters already believe in you. That's more than most people ever get." Her fingers hovered over the folder like it might vanish. And in some ways, it already felt like a dream. She had lived so long without anyone holding a door open that she forgot what it looked like. And in that moment, in that glass-walled office on the 27th floor, something shifted. Not just in her life, but in his. Because for the first time, Daniel Harris wasn't thinking about profit margins or board meetings. He was thinking about a woman with blistered hands and daughters who still believed magic could happen if you were brave enough to knock on the wrong door. He offers her the job. Not as charity, not as pity, but as someone who finally sees the woman behind the gloves. How many people have we passed by without realizing they're the strongest ones in the room? Chapter 2. She used to dream in courtrooms. Before the gloves. Before the mop. Before she taught herself how to hide the sound of crying behind a running faucet. Emma Gray had a dream. Not a big one, not a loud one. Just a quiet certainty that she would one day stand in a courtroom and speak with a voice people couldn't ignore. She loved the stillness of libraries, the thrill of argument, the way a single sentence could turn a case. She believed in justice like some people believed in prayer. And for a while, she was almost there. Her textbook still sat on a shelf in her tiny apartment, highlighted, dog-eared, pages rippling from old coffee spills. She hadn't opened them in years, but she couldn't throw them away. Not because of the information they held, but because of who she used to be when she read them. Michael was her safe place. He used to quiz her at night, lying beside her on the floor of their one-bedroom apartment, his voice playful and soft. "Okay, future lawyer, what's the first clause in a contract?" She always got it wrong on purpose just to make him laugh. He died 6 months later. Highway accident. No warning, no time to say goodbye. And just like that, her world broke in half. 2 newborn daughters. No family nearby. An unfinished degree and bills that didn't wait for grief. She dropped out, telling herself it was temporary. Then came the first cleaning job. Then the second. By the time the twins were 3, she was working nights so she could care for them during the day. Every hour, a negotiation between exhaustion and guilt. Daniel didn't know this. Not yet. But he would soon. Because when she walked into his office the next morning, he wasn't the only one trying to stay composed. She had stayed up the night before staring at that legal assistant packet, reading and rereading the position summary until her vision blurred. She hadn't applied. She hadn't asked. But someone had seen her. Not just the gloves. Not just the name on a schedule. When she sat across from him again, her voice was quieter than before. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. Daniel didn't blink. "You already are." He walked her through the job description like it mattered. And for the first time in years, someone treated her intelligence like a fact, not a memory. He mentioned the training program, the flexible hours, the child care partnership for Lily and Sophie. Every objection she had, he answered gently. Not with pressure, just with the steady belief that she wasn't too late. At home that night, she tucked the girls into bed and stood by their doorway, watching them sleep. They had no idea what they'd started. No idea how their tiny hands had pushed open a door that grown men had never dared knock on. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a case law text she hadn't touched since before they were born. The cover cracked like dry leaves. Inside, she found one of Michael's old notes. "You've got this. Your daughters will watch you change the world." She closed her eyes and let herself believe it, just for a moment. She opens her law book again. For the first time in years, she sees herself as someone who still can. She used to dream in courtrooms. Now she just tries not to fall asleep at the stove. Until someone handed her a folder and said it's still possible. What part of yourself did you pack away when life got too loud, and what would it take to open it again? The job she never applied for. She walked into the legal department with borrowed confidence. Her badge still said night staff, janitorial. But today, they gave her a new one. It trembled slightly when clipped to her sweater. Like even the plastic was unsure she belonged. The desk they gave her was small, tucked into the far corner. But it had drawers, and a lamp, and space for something that had long gone missing from her life. Possibility. Emma sat down, and for a moment she just stared. At the keyboard, at the bookshelves, at the neat little sign that said Legal Intern Training Program. It felt too quiet, too clean, too foreign. Until she opened her first memo draft and realized she still remembered more than she thought. Not all of it, not fluently, but enough. Enough to make a start. Across the building, Daniel Harris was pacing inside his office, but not for the usual reasons. He had built his empire on decisiveness. Make a move, cut what's weak, protect what's strong. But Emma Gray had taught him something in just 48 hours. Sometimes what looks invisible is just someone no one bothered to look at. He checked her progress quietly, asked the paralegal team to be patient, assigned a mentor. He didn't want to interfere, but he needed to know not if she'd succeed, but if she'd believe she could. Meanwhile, Emma was fighting a new battle. Not the floors, not the endless hours. This time the fight was in her mind. Every email she typed felt like a test. Every meeting like walking into a room wearing someone else's shoes. There were whispers. Not cruel, just curious. Isn't she the night janitor? Yes, she was. But she was also something else. A survivor, a student, a mother who still believed her daughters deserved to see her try. At home, Lily and Sophie noticed the difference. "Mommy, you smell like books now," Sophie said one night, scrunching her nose adorably. Emma laughed for the first time in weeks. Books, not bleach. Daniel stopped by her desk late one afternoon. She was reviewing a contract clause, muttering under her breath, trying to untangle the logic. "You're close," he said softly, not startling her. She looked up, surprised by how natural it felt to see him standing there. "I feel like it's written in another language," she whispered. "You'll learn it," he said. "I did, and you're smarter than I was at the start." She shook her head. "You didn't have twin girls depending on you." "No," he said, his voice lowering. "But maybe that's why you'll be better than anyone else who's ever sat at this desk." He didn't touch her hand. He didn't linger too long. But when he walked away, she realized something. She hadn't felt seen like that in years. Not by a man, not by the world. Not even by herself. That night, as she folded laundry beside her daughters, she smiled to herself when she saw their matching white headbands on the table. Those girls had walked into an office with nothing but crayons and love, and somehow they'd handed her back a version of herself she thought was gone. Emma begins working in legal, struggles, but stays. Daniel stops by, gently encourages her, and it lands. She never applied for the job, her daughters did. Now she's sitting at a desk she never dreamed she'd earn back. What would happen if you stopped asking, "Am I ready?" and started saying, "Maybe I already am"? Chapter 4. Wiping tables, studying law. Emma's day started before the sun. Not because they had to, but because she wanted the quiet before the world woke up. She would sit at the kitchen table, highlighter in one hand, Lily's half-drawn crayon portrait of a law mommy taped to the cabinet beside her. The coffee was cheap, the room was dim, but something inside her was glowing again. She studied while the girls slept. She wiped the stove while memorizing tort definitions. She packed peanut butter sandwiches while reviewing legal outlines on flashcards taped to the fridge. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't easy. But it was hers. At the office, she still moved like a shadow. Quiet. Careful. Apologizing for taking up space, even when she belonged. But there were moments now, brief and gold, where she remembered what it felt like to know something. One Thursday afternoon, her mentor, Rachel, slid a folder across the desk. "Review the indemnity clause," she said. "You'll get it." Emma froze. "I don't want to mess it up." Rachel smiled gently. "You won't. And if you do, we fix it. That's how we learn." Emma took a breath, picked up her pen, and rewrote the entire paragraph from scratch. 2 hours later, Rachel returned. "Perfect," she whispered. "That was law." Meanwhile, Daniel watched from a distance. Not because he was unsure, but because he respected her pace. Still, he noticed the way her hands stopped shaking when she typed. He noticed how the girls beamed when they came by on Fridays and called him Mr. Daniel, like he was their favorite neighbor. He didn't mean to linger in her hallway. Didn't mean to remember the exact way she wore her hair that day. But he did. One evening, he walked into the break room and found her alone, coffee mug clutched in both hands, eyes closed, just breathing. She opened her eyes and saw him, smiled without apology. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, just tired in a different way now. "What kind of tired?" "The good kind," she whispered. "The kind that says, you're building something." He nodded. "That's the only kind worth being." She didn't ask why he'd come in. He didn't say, but they both knew something was shifting. Not fast, not loud, just enough to feel it in the quiet. At home, Lily and Sophie began drawing again. Pictures of courtroom desks and tiny stick-figure judges. One night, Sophie asked, "Mommy, are you going to be one of the people who talk and make the rules?" Emma blinked. "You don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday." "Good," Lily said sleepily, "because you're already one of the smart ones." The girls fell asleep, tangled in blankets. Emma stayed at the doorway for a while. "Still okay?" Not rushing, because for the first time in years, her exhaustion wasn't from barely surviving. It was from reaching again. Emma rewrites her first legal clause. Rachel says softly, "That was law." Emma lets herself believe she's coming back. She used to clean their tables. Now she's at the table, pen in hand. Voice steady, not invisible anymore. What if the tired you feel today is just proof that you're finally building something that's yours? Late nights and leftover coffee. It began with coffee, not the kind that comes fresh from a boardroom machine with a silver label and perfect crema. The kind that's left behind, half warm, forgotten. The kind Emma used to pour out in the middle of the night when the offices were empty and the windows reflected no one but herself. It was an accident. Stupid drunk driver. For a moment, I thought I could control it. I drummed up a plan. Now she drank it sitting across from him. It wasn't a date. It wasn't anything, really. Just a late work session that ran long. A clause she couldn't crack. A pause too quiet to ignore. Daniel walked in and noticed her still at her desk. Stack of legal files, tired eyes, fingers fidgeting. He leaned on the door frame, arms crossed. "Still here?" She glanced up. "Trying to finish this analysis? I'm stuck." Mind some company? She hesitated, then smiled. Pull up a chair. They sat beside each other for nearly an hour. He didn't take over, didn't correct. Just asked questions. What do you think this means? What's the risk? Why do you think they phrased it like that? She surprised herself by knowing more than she thought, and surprised him by how fast she was learning. At one point, their hands touched as they reached for the same highlighter. Neither moved away. The office was quiet. Everyone else had gone. The overhead lights buzzed softly. The draft came through the vent. And for the first time, Daniel looked at her not like someone he helped, but like someone who mattered. He watched her eyes scan the paper. How she bit her lip when she thought hard. How her breath slowed when she solved something. And she noticed him noticing. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the elevator. Not out of duty, but because he didn't want to miss the last moment with her that night. You're doing good work, Emma. She turned slightly, surprised. You sure? He nodded once, positive. A pause. Then, you always drink your coffee cold? She asked, smiling. Only when it comes with good company, he said. At home, she didn't tell the girls. Not because there was anything to hide, but because she didn't want to speak something that wasn't real yet. It was just coffee, just conversation. But inside, something had shifted. She found herself looking for him now, in the small moments. Not expecting, just aware. The way his tie loosened by 5 p.m. The crease in his brow when deep in thought. The softness in his voice when he asked about her daughters. And he noticed things too. How she touched every document with care. She greeted the receptionist by name. How she never talked about herself, but listened like she wanted to carry other people's burdens, just to lighten the load. On Friday, the twins came by the office for their weekly visit. They crashed into Daniel's legs like they'd known him forever. Mr. Daniel, Sophie said proudly, Mommy doesn't cry in the bathroom anymore. He blinked, stunned. Emma blushed and gently hushed her, but Daniel shook his head. I'm glad, he said softly. That's a good thing. Lily looked up. She smiles more now, like real smiles? That night, Emma sat on the fire escape after putting the girls to bed. She looked out over the quiet street and thought about the man who used to be a headline to her, now becoming a heartbeat. He hadn't tried to save her. He just stayed. Daniel stays late. They study together. Hands brush. The line between professional and personal begins to gently blur. He used to walk past her, now he stays beside her, after hours, after roles, after fear. What if love doesn't arrive in grand moments, but in leftover coffee and the first time someone stays? Chapter 6, The First Time He Stayed. It started with a paper folded in two, slipped into Emma's bag by Sophie's tiny hands. On the front, in purple crayon, were stick figures and a stage. Inside, scrawled in careful block letters, Friday, Family Talent Day, 2 p.m., my class. Emma smiled as she read it, standing at the bus stop, her coffee lukewarm in a to-go cup. Family Talent Day, a time for parents to sit in plastic chairs and clap through off-key recorders and glitter-covered science boards. But Emma hadn't planned on going. She couldn't take another hour off work. She had already rearranged her shift twice that week to make meetings at the legal department. And besides, she didn't want to be the only parent in old jeans with tired eyes and no one sitting next to her. But that morning, she packed 2 sandwiches with the edges cut off, just the way the girls liked. Then she hesitated and packed a third. Daniel didn't know why he asked. They were just talking. He had walked past her desk to ask about a client memo, but she had looked up with a small, distracted frown. Something wrong? He'd asked. No, she said softly, just, there's this school thing. I want to go, I do, but I can't leave again today. Daniel had nodded, respectfully quiet. She hadn't expected more than that. But something in his chest stirred when she walked away. Something that felt suspiciously like not wanting her to sit alone. At Friday at 1:58 p.m., the classroom buzzed with soft chaos. Children lined the walls in paper crowns and face paint. A poster near the chalkboard read, "Talent is who you are." Emma stood near the back, hands knotted together, her coat still on. She tried not to shrink into herself. Her sweater was clean but faded. The woman next to her wore heels and a silk scarf that probably cost more than Emma's monthly groceries. Still, she stayed. For the girls. Sophie spotted her first. Her eyes lit up and she waved both arms. "Mommy's here," she squealed, running over. Emma crouched down to hug her. "Of course I am," she whispered. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." Sophie leaned in, her breath warm and sweet. "We're going last, so everyone remembers us." Emma laughed. "Smart plan." Then Lily tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, looking at the door. Emma turned. Daniel Harris stood there. No suit, no entourage. Just jeans, a dark sweater, and a look that didn't match his usual boardroom confidence. He looked unsure, and somehow that made her chest ache. He gave a small wave, hesitant, then looked down as if already questioning his decision. But when Lily ran to him and grabbed his hand like it was the most normal thing in the world, everything else faded. Sophie pointed toward the row of tiny chairs. "Sit with us, Mr. Daniel. We saved a seat." He blinked. "You did?" Emma's throat tightened. "They save it every time. Just in case." Daniel sat and stayed. The next 30 minutes were a parade of offbeat glory. A boy performed magic tricks with a hat that kept falling off. The girl played Twinkle Twinkle on the violin, stopping halfway to sneeze. 2 siblings danced in butterfly wings. Each time the class clapped like it was Broadway. When it was finally Lily and Sophie's turn, they walked slowly to the front. They held hands. Lily spoke first, her voice clear and strong. "We want to show our mom how proud we are." Sophie added, "And Mr. Daniel too, because he helped Mommy remember she's smart." Emma's breath caught. Daniel didn't move. The girls began to sing, a song they made up themselves, off-key, sweet, about peanut butter sandwiches and coffee and dreams that take a while but still come true. Emma covered her mouth with one hand. The other found Daniel's. He didn't flinch, didn't move away, just held on. After the applause, parents gathered their kids. Lily and Sophie ran into their mother's arms, bouncing with pride. "Did you like it?" Sophie asked. "I loved it," Emma whispered, then turned to Daniel. "I didn't know you'd come." He shrugged slightly. "They saved me a seat." Emma laughed, shaky and soft. "You didn't have to stay." "I wanted to," he said. Simple, honest. They walked out together. The street outside was warm with late spring. Sunlight filtered through trees blooming with hope. Daniel offered to buy them ice cream. The girls cheered. They found a small bench near the corner store, cones dripping and fingers sticky. Emma didn't sit. She leaned against the railing, arms folded. She wasn't used to being part of these kinds of moments, not without worry creeping in. Daniel came to stand beside her. "And they love you," he said quietly. She didn't answer. "You know that, right?" She nodded. "I try not to mess it up." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not messing it up." Back at home, the girls napped tangled in the blankets on the couch, the sound of their breathing soft as a lullaby. Emma stood in the kitchen, hands resting on the counter. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand. "Hey, you're staying for dinner?" she asked. He nodded. "Okay," she whispered. She didn't know what they were yet, didn't know where this was going. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone in the not knowing. They ate macaroni and cheese from a pot. No candles, no fanfare. But it was warm. And it was shared. And when Lily woke up, groggy, and crawled into Daniel's lap without hesitation, Emma saw it clear as breath on glass. He wasn't visiting their lives anymore. He was in it. After the girls fell asleep again, Daniel stood to go. Emma walked him to the door. He paused, then turned. "I'll see you Monday." She nodded. "Yeah." He hesitated, then said it quietly. "I'm proud of you, Emma." Her breath hitched. No one had said that to her in years. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." He smiled. That was the easy part. Monday came quietly. The elevator ride to the 27th floor was like every other day. But this time, when Daniel passed Emma's desk, he paused, only for a second, and slid something folded under her keyboard. She didn't notice it until an hour later. It was a drawing, Lily's handwriting in green crayon. "Mr. Daniel sat with us. He's part of our family now." Emma held it for a long time before slipping it gently into her purse like something sacred. Later that afternoon, Daniel stood outside the glass wall of the legal department. He watched her through the frosted edge. She was in conversation with her mentor, eyebrows furrowed, posture firm. She wasn't shrinking anymore, and he realized she wasn't the same woman he'd first met. She didn't flinch when spoken to now. She didn't apologize before giving her thoughts in meetings. She didn't hover near the edges. She was stepping in. Not loud, but present. That week, Emma drafted her first full contract proposal. Rachel gave it back with only 2 minor notes and 1 handwritten comment. "You are officially one of us now." After work on Thursday, Emma stopped by the park with the girls. She needed fresh air more than they needed playground time. While Lily and Sophie ran ahead toward the swings, Emma sat alone on a wooden bench, feet sore, head full, but somehow calm. She thought of her old self, the version of Emma who used to sleep 4 hours a night and survive on adrenaline and fear, the one who cried behind locked bathroom doors and counted change for bread. And she realized that Emma had gotten her here. But she didn't want to live inside survival anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text. "Daniel, do they still save me a seat on Fridays?" Emma smiled, typed back. "They said they'll stop when you stop showing up, so no pressure." That night, Daniel dropped by again, just for a few minutes. He brought books for the girls, used ones, gently worn. One had a dragon on the cover, the other a princess with tangled curls. Emma stood in the doorway, arms crossed, leaning against the frame while he read. His voice was low, steady. He made the dragon snore loudly between pages just to make Sophie giggle. She hadn't realized she was smiling until he looked up and met her eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. After they left, Lily whispered from her bunk bed, "Mommy, he stays a lot now." Emma brushed a curl from her daughter's cheek. "Yes. Do you think he'll keep staying?" Emma paused, then whispered, "I hope so." She didn't want to get ahead of it. Didn't want to imagine weddings or futures or promises. But the truth was, he'd stayed when she expected him to walk. And maybe that meant something. At work, the shift continued. Emma's name began to circulate in emails. Her work was quiet but thorough, her questions thoughtful. Daniel never mentioned her progress in front of others. But behind closed doors, he advocated. He remembered. One afternoon during a board meeting, an executive joked, "You're spending a lot of hours in legal, Dan, trying to change professions?" Daniel didn't laugh. He simply replied, "I'm learning to listen better." The next day, a new employee welcome packet included a quiet addition, a mentorship track for night staff who wished to re-enter education. Emma noticed. It didn't say a word, but she knew exactly who had written that policy in. The week ended with a storm. It wasn't dramatic, just steady. That soft kind of rain that makes everything feel slower, heavier. Emma sat at her desk, fingers stiff from typing, her inbox blinking with unread messages. She was tired, not the kind that sleep could fix. Her body remembered the nights before this new life. The nights she'd cleaned this very floor with a sore back and empty hope. And yet, here she was. Same building, different self. Daniel appeared just after 5. He stood at her desk, holding 2 paper cups. "I figured you wouldn't stop for a break," he said. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Are you watching me now?" He didn't flinch, only when I'm impressed. She smirked, the smile finding her lips before she gave it permission. "Thank you," she said, taking the coffee. "It's still warm. You're learning." "I learn fast," he replied, then paused. "Also, I wanted to ask you something." She tilted her head. "What?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "There's a school fundraiser tomorrow. The girls mentioned it." Emma nodded. "Yeah, bake sale. I promised we'd bring cookies." Daniel hesitated, then said it. "Can I come?" The question stunned her. He'd never asked before. He just showed up. But something about the way he said it this time felt different. He wasn't just showing up. He wanted to be included. "Sure," she said, voice soft. "They'll be thrilled." He smiled, relief flickering through his expression like sunlight through blinds. "Good," he said, "because I already bought flour." The next morning, Daniel Harris stood in Emma's tiny kitchen with an apron that read, "Let's bake mistakes." He cracked eggs too hard, spilled sugar on the floor, burnt the first batch of cookies. The girls shrieked with laughter, and Emma watched, heart full, eyes damp. Not because of what he did, but because of how he did it. Like he belonged. Like he'd always meant to be there. They brought the cookies in together, paper plates covered in foil and care. The bake sale was loud and chaotic, kids everywhere. But Daniel didn't leave early. He helped set up. He ran out to get more napkins. He manned the lemonade table when a volunteer left unexpectedly. Emma passed by once, saw him crouched beside Sophie, helping her make change. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had found the one thing he didn't know he'd needed. A reason to stay. That night, after the girls were asleep and the kitchen was clean again, Emma poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. Daniel sat across from her, hair slightly messy, tie gone, sleeves rolled up. "I think I like cookies," he said. Emma smiled. "Even the burnt ones?" "Especially the burnt ones. They feel honest." She laughed quietly. "You're not what I expected, you know." He looked at her, calm. "Neither are you." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that feels like a conversation. Then Daniel said it soft, low but clear. "I like being here." Emma looked down at her cup. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to." She met his eyes. "What are you saying it for, then?" He didn't answer right away. Just reached across the table and gently laid his hand over hers. "For the same reason I stay," he said. Emma's breath caught. She didn't pull away. The quiet held them like a promise. And in that stillness she realized something. It wasn't just that he stayed. It was how, with patience, with presence, without asking her to become anyone else. He stayed in the hard parts, in the awkward ones, in the messy kitchen and the tired silences, in the places where most people politely leave. Later, as he stood by the door pulling on his coat, he turned to her. "Good night, Emma." "Good night, Daniel." He hesitated, then smiled. "Tell the girls I said thank you for saving me a seat." And when he left, she stood there for a long time, hand on the doorknob, heart full, in a way she hadn't felt since before everything fell apart. Because now, something new was being built. Not fast, but real. Daniel doesn't just show up. He stays through the fundraiser, the baking mess, the awkward goodbyes. He tells her, without pressure, "I like being here." Love didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in burnt cookies and quiet hands that didn't let go. When was the last time someone stayed not because they had to, but because they chose to? You make her smile, really smile. The girls said it first. Not Emma. Not Danielle. Lily and Sophie, seated at the kitchen table with jelly on their cheeks and glitter glue stuck to their fingers, looked up one morning and declared it like a fact. They didn't need permission to believe. "You make her smile," Sophie said. Daniel blinked, mid-sip of coffee. "Like really smile," Lily added, twisting her juice straw. "Not the tired kind." Emma froze at the stove, spatula in hand. She wasn't used to being talked about like that. Like someone worth noticing. It had been weeks since the bake sale, since the school stage, since the first time he stayed. And now, Daniel stayed more often than he left. He knew where the bread was. He knew Sophie didn't like crust. He knew Lily preferred bedtime stories in a whisper. He didn't ask for keys, didn't demand space. He just became part of the rhythm. Emma hadn't meant for this to happen. She was building a new life, 1 hour, 1 class, 1 invoice at a time. But somehow Daniel had walked through the cracks, without asking her to stop building. He didn't offer to carry it all. He simply offered his hands when hers were full. At work, they still kept it quiet. Not hidden, just sacred. They passed like colleagues in the hallway. But in the quiet corners, the legal file room, the copy machine, they smiled like people who had secrets that didn't need explaining. One Tuesday afternoon, Emma left her notes on his desk. At the bottom of the margin, he scribbled in pencil, "I like this version of you. She's brave." She didn't erase it. She folded it and tucked it into her wallet, behind a picture of the girls at age 2. Friday nights had become tradition. Dinner, board games, something sweet after. Daniel once burned the apple crisp. The fire alarm went off. The girls thought it was hilarious. Emma laughed so hard she cried. And Daniel just stood there, holding the charred pan, heart wide open, watching a woman who had once hidden her joy, now letting it spill over like something sacred. One night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch and Sophie was brushing her teeth with cartoon music playing in the background, Emma stood by the window in Daniel's apartment. The city blinked outside, restless, alive. He came up behind her, quiet. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I didn't know it could feel like this," she whispered. "Like what?" "Safe." He didn't rush in with declarations. He didn't say love. But he touched her hand and she leaned into his shoulder, and the silence between them said everything. The next morning, Sophie asked him if he was going to be our dad someday. Emma nearly choked on her coffee. But Daniel didn't laugh. He crouched to her level, looked her in the eye, and said gently, "That's not up to me. But I'd like to be here, as long as you'll have me." Sophie nodded solemnly. "Okay, but you have to help with science fair." Emma watched that moment like her heart was remembering something it once gave up on. A man who didn't flinch. A man who answered small voices with big respect. That Sunday, she returned to the law library. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. She walked the aisles, ran her fingers along the books she used to dream through, pulled down a volume on family law. Yeah, out as a mother, trying to survive, but as a woman, remembering that she had more than survival to give. Daniel waited outside, not rushed, not impatient, just quiet. When she walked out, face lit by something deeper than sunlight, he smiled. "You stayed," she said. "Of course I did," he replied. That night, Lily whispered to Emma while getting tucked in, "Mommy, when you smile now, it doesn't look like you're pretending anymore." Emma kissed her forehead. "That's because I'm not." The girls quietly named the truth. You make her smile, like really smile. Emma begins to believe maybe this love is real because it's quiet, steady, and safe. It wasn't her who said it first. It was the daughters. You make her smile, not the tired kind, the real one. What if the first person to believe in your healing isn't you, but the child who never stopped watching? Chapter 8. We tied the ribbons ourselves. The invitation wasn't printed. It was handmade on thick craft paper with glitter at the edges and letters that wobbled like they'd been written by someone holding their breath. At the bottom, in red crayon, "Will you come see our family be real?" Lily and Sophie had drawn flowers in the corners. Hearts, a sun with a crooked smile. In the middle, stick figures again, 4 this time. Mummy. Me too. And a man with dark hair labeled "Us Now." Emma found it folded in her purse the day before the girls gave it to Daniel. She hadn't known they were planning it, but she should have guessed. Because all week they'd been whispering, hiding paper, asking strange questions like, "Do you think families can grow if you water them?" And "Does love need practice like piano?" They weren't asking to be chosen. They were showing him he already had been. Daniel opened the envelope with care that surprised even himself. He'd signed million-dollar contracts with less trembling in his hands. But this wasn't a deal. This was a promise. The event they planned wasn't a wedding. Not officially. There were no guests. No officiant. No dress. Just a park, a bench, and a banner made from string and markers that read, "Thank you for loving our mom." Daniel stood beneath it, blinking back something in his chest he didn't have a name for. The girls wore matching dresses, blue like the sky before rain. Emma wore a soft white blouse and her hair pulled back with a ribbon Sophie had tied herself. "Too tight?" Sophie had asked. Emma had smiled. Just right. They didn't say vows. They said truth. Lily went first. You stayed, she said simply, standing on tiptoe. Even when we didn't ask? Sophie added, you make her laugh with her whole face. Then Emma stepped forward. She didn't hold a bouquet. She held Daniel's hand. I didn't know how to trust anything this good, she said quietly. But you didn't rush me. You didn't ask for pieces I wasn't ready to give. You just stayed. Her voice cracked. I didn't think love could be quiet, but maybe that's why this feels real. Daniel didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at the girls, then at her, then reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. Inside, nothing flashy, just a ring, simple enough to mean everything. I wasn't waiting for the perfect time, he said. I was waiting for you to know I'd still be here when you were ready. Emma looked at the girls. They nodded solemnly. Then Sophie whispered, we tied the ribbons ourselves. Emma said yes. Not with a shout, not with fanfare, just a soft yes. And Daniel, he didn't kiss her right away. He knelt to hug the girls first. Then he stood, and she kissed him like a woman who knew she wasn't being rescued, but finally received. They didn't call it a wedding, but it was a beginning, a quiet one, tied together with glitter, glue, and 1,000 unspoken second chances. The girls plan the ceremony themselves. They call it a family day. Daniel proposes, not to impress, but to honor. Emma says yes, not because she's swept away, but because she finally feels safe. They didn't ask to be chosen. They showed him he already was. What if love isn't loud, but lives in the people who stay, quietly tying ribbons while no one is watching? Chapter 9, where love grows slowly. They didn't move into a mansion. They moved into a house with creaky floors, paint-chipped windowsills, and a backyard just big enough for 2 swings and a crooked garden box. It wasn't new, but it was there, and for the first time, the girls had a room. They didn't have to share with boxes. Daniel didn't bring his suits. He brought a box of storybooks and a promise to be home by dinner. Every corner of the house whispered second chances. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and laughter. The fridge became a museum of crayon drawings and spelling tests. The living room floor was littered with Legos and coffee mugs and hope. Emma kept her job in the legal department, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she still had something to say. She worked 3 days a week, studied 1 day, and volunteered 1 evening helping other women navigate re-entry into education. She never wore the gloves again, but she never forgot them. Daniel changed too. He started showing up late to the office on purpose. He delegated, he listened more. He even let himself be human in meetings, asking questions instead of always having answers. His board noticed, his staff noticed. But no one saw the shift more than Lily and Sophie. Mr. Daniel doesn't look lonely anymore, Sophie whispered one night as she set the table. Emma smiled. No, she said, he looks found. They didn't rush a big ceremony. No tuxedos, no save the dates. But they planted herbs in the backyard together. Named each plant something silly. Basil became Professor Leaf. Thyme was Timothy the Time Traveler. And one morning, after a week of rain, Daniel found Emma kneeling in the garden, fingers muddy, hair messy, humming to herself. He just stood in the doorway, watching her like she was everything he never thought he deserved, growing. She caught him staring. What? She asked, smiling. Nothing, he said. Just glad you stayed, too. On Sundays, they made pancakes. Emma burned the first batch. The girls insisted Daniel be the official flipper. He wore an apron again. Same one, still read, "Let's bake mistakes." But this time, the mistakes tasted like home. One night, as a thunderstorm rolled in, Emma sat on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea. Daniel joined her without speaking. The girls were asleep. The house was still. The rain tapped against the wood like a lullaby. You know what I used to think love was? She whispered. He shook his head. A rescue boat. A loud one. Sirens and speed and someone pulling you out of the storm. Daniel glanced over, quiet. And now? Emma smiled, eyes soft. Now I think it's just someone who doesn't leave when the rain starts. He took her hand. Not tight, not possessive, just steady. The same way he'd shown up the first time, and every time since. The emotional peak of chapter. Emma redefines love not as rescue but as presence. They build something slow, real, and ordinary, and she no longer fears that it will vanish. He didn't give her a castle. He gave her a kitchen with mismatched mugs and a hand that stayed when the rain came. What if your forever didn't arrive in a grand gesture, but in the quiet rhythm of someone who never stops showing up? Chapter 10. The day we called it home. There was no banner, no photographer, no big announcement. Just a Tuesday. A plain, quiet Tuesday. And yet, it was the day everything became real. Sophie had forgotten her lunchbox. Emma called Daniel to tell him she'd drop it off before court prep, but his reply made her pause. "I'm already outside her school," he said. She blinked. "You are?" "Yeah," he said, laughing softly. "I had a feeling." He hadn't planned to be there, but he showed up. Not with a flourish, with a sandwich and an orange juice and a note in marker that said, "I believe in you, always." Sophie showed it off like a trophy. Later that night, Emma found the twins sitting on the rug, whispering. "Should we ask now?" Lily said. Emma crouched down. "Ask what?" They held up a frame made of popsicle sticks and glitter. Inside was a family drawing. This one had a front door, a garden, a dog, and a tiny mailbox that said, "Love lives here." At the top, "Our home." At the bottom, "Mommy, Daniel, me, and me too." "Can we call it that now?" Sophie asked. "Call what?" "Our home," Lily said. "For real, not just where we sleep." Emma couldn't speak. Her throat was full, so she just nodded. And the girls squealed, hugging her knees like their hearts had been waiting for that word to stick. Daniel walked in a moment later, dust on his jacket from fixing the backyard fence. He looked confused at first, then smiled as Sophie tackled his legs. "We live here now," she declared. "We do?" he asked, teasing. Lily nodded solemnly. Mommy said yes. That night, after the dishes were done and the girls were tucked in, Daniel and Emma stood at the kitchen sink, watching the porch light sway. "You sure?" he asked softly. Emma nodded. "I've never been more sure." They didn't toast. They didn't write it down. But in the quiet, shared space between 2 cups of tea and the soft hum of their daughters sleeping, they made it official. This wasn't a house. This was home. Later that week, Emma stood in the break room at the office, packing a file into her tote bag. Rachel, her mentor, smiled from the doorway. "You're different now," she said. Emma looked up. "Am I?" "You're not carrying everything alone anymore." She didn't mean just the legal cases. Said she meant the ache, the weight, the silent fear that good things don't last. At the front desk, a new intern asked Emma for help navigating a case. Emma nodded, confident now. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was here, visible, capable, and finally loved out loud. On Sunday morning, the girls woke early and ran to the backyard barefoot. The first tomato had ripened in the garden. They screamed like it was Christmas. Daniel came out, half asleep, coffee in hand. They made him eat it. He winced dramatically. "Best tomato I've ever had," he said. Emma stood on the porch, arms folded, smile soft and easy. And in that moment, as sun hit the grass and children's laughter filled the air, she whispered something into the stillness. "Thank you for this life I never dared ask for." The girls ask if they can finally call it home. Emma says yes. Daniel shows up again, quietly. And what was once survival becomes belonging. They didn't need a deed, or a ring, or a speech. They just needed one ordinary Tuesday to finally call it home. What if the day your life changes forever doesn't look like magic? It just looks like someone showing up for lunch. If this story touched you, it wasn't because of money, or power, or titles. It was because somewhere deep inside, you've known what it feels like to hold your world together with trembling hands, while everyone else walks by. Maybe you've been Emma. Maybe you still are. Typing counters while wondering what happened to the dreams you used to believe were yours. Holding in tears behind smiles that try too hard. Going to bed wondering if love, the kind that stays, is for people like you. But here's what this story wants to say. You are not forgotten, not invisible, not too late. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with roses. Sometimes it arrives with cold coffee and a man who sits beside your daughter at a school play and claps too loud. Sometimes the people who save us aren't saviors at all. They're just people who stayed, gently, quietly, until we started to believe again. Daniel didn't rescue her. He saw her. He waited. He listened. And she, Emma Gray, didn't need fixing. She needed rest. She needed space. She needed to remember who she was before life made her feel too small to speak. If you've ever packed your dreams into a back closet just to survive the week, this story is yours too. If you've ever made peanut butter sandwiches while whispering, maybe one day, this story is yours. If you've ever stood in a room full of powerful people and thought, I used to believe I belonged here, this story is yours. It's not about a CEO. It's about what happens when a woman stops apologizing for being tired and starts rising anyway. It's about daughters who see everything, even the tears you think you've hidden. And it's about what happens when someone finally sits beside you and says, you don't have to do this alone anymore. So if you're still waiting for your moment, still wondering if anyone will ever tie a ribbon just for you, don't let go. Your story might not look like this one, but the kind of love that stays, the kind that shows up with cookies and quiet eyes and a slow, steady hand, it's real, and it finds the ones who never stopped hoping, even when hope felt too heavy. The next one goes even deeper. Someone else needs to hear this. Send it to the person who's still holding on. See you in the next story.